What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner, and 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. I also co-host and co-produce the only online show in the world for dads and fathers. It's sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. And being part of that collaboration last year, reached out directly and indirectly to over 100,000 fathers around the world. So as always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. We're broadcasting live on November 27th. I'm here in Toronto where it's dreary, raining, dark, as my dad says, like a day of night in Toronto here today. And usually at 5 p.m. Eastern time, on most Sundays, we do Black Canada Talking, but we pushing it up a little bit today on the request of a special friend because he's in such demand. We've jimmied it to we do a different time start today. But for those who are not familiar, Black Canada Talking is a live online event that provides Black Canadians the opportunity to give their takes and POVs on stories that are of importance to them. So this is every edition special. But I want to encourage also, if you are watching and if you haven't done it yet, would like to say subscribe to the Dr. Vibe channel on YouTube and or Facebook so you get notified about all these epic conversations that we have. So let me bring up our two friends today because we have a special conversation topic today. So we're going to bring up Elle Jones first. Hello, Elle Jones. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Outstanding. Is it a little, are you liking the 3 o'clock Eastern time start or do you like the 5 o'clock better?
5 probably.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. How are things going with you? How are things going with the book? And how are things going with your students?
Good. Well, we're coming to the end of the year. We're into the last weeks of classes, like last couple of weeks. With the book, I just got off the road again. So, hopefully it's going well. You can pick it up in bookstores, hopefully. I guess it's been, there's some supply chain stuff. So it's been hard to get out copies, I guess. So you can order it online as well, like order from Fernwood Press if you want a copy. And yeah, it seems like it's going well. So.
Okay, well, fantastic. And I still have to get my copy. So I still have to reach out to you and find out the best way to get it directly without doing the Amazon thing or that sort of thing. But it's always great to have you in the presence. And anyone who's watching live on the replay, especially if you're live, please give us comments and we will be able to respond to them in real time. So this is the person that caused Elle to have to do a little bit of a different vibe today. Mr. Richard Sharpe. Have not seen him for an hour. Forget the minute. The hour. Mr. Sharpe, how art thou and your family?
I am doing well. Thank you, Dr. Vibe. It's a pleasure to be on the show. And yeah, it has been a long hour. Feels like a little bit too long. I've missed being out in community. It's wonderful to be with the two doctors, Dr. Vibe and Dr. Elle Jones.
Yes, Dr. Elle Jones is correct.
I've been solid company tonight.
Well, for I think many who are watching, well, there's probably a lot of people watching, but there's many others that are going to be watching this live in the replay. Can you give a little bit about your background? Because even the last time I talked to you, you were always moving. So can you share a little bit about yourself with the world here?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was out in community. I'm a long-term public servant. I've been working for the federal government for about 26 into 27 years. I was out for 2 years working in community on something called the UN International Decade People of African Descent. That's where some people in the community know me. I was working with some wonderful community activists around something called the UN UNDPAD Push Coalition. And that was really intended to push a lot of Black-centered initiatives into the federal government so that we could make them lasting, make them enduring. So I got an offer I couldn't refuse to go back into the federal government to do the same kind of work at the Department of Justice Canada. So I became a Fed again and at an executive level and tried my darndest to change the world from inside the machine. And you all know how easy that is. And now out again, just got another opportunity in the Ontario government to lead something called the Black Equity Branch within the the Treasury Board Secretariat of the province of Ontario. Again, focus on applying that Black lens across the Ontario Public Service, and hopefully that trickles out into community. So while I'm out in between these two jobs, I thought I would step back in the ring and talk about something really dear to my heart, and something that I think will impact our Black communities in a big way over the next months and year.
Fantastic. And we are supposed to have another friend, one of our regulars, Cesar, with us. He isn't here yet, but you know what? We go with what we got. And so we're going to start with Richard.
I was going to say, do you think Cesar caught the time change?
I emailed him.
Okay.
I emailed him. So, and I'm checking my email just to see if he responds, but I just emailed again the link. So I'm speaking, he's going to show up. But you know what? We got what we got. We're going to go forward with it. So let's, Richard, can you give a little background of UNDPAD? Because I have a feeling still a lot of people aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it, and I think that's by design. In the United Nations put in place something called the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, and this decade is really focused on highlighting and celebrating the significant contributions that people of African descent have been making in Canadian society and across the globe. It was officially recognized in 2018 by the Government of Canada, and really it was focusing around a couple of key areas around providing a framework around recognition, justice, and development. Those are the three pillars of the decade. And so that gave us license, really. And why I stepped out of government a couple of years ago was to focus on things like fighting anti-Black racism and discrimination, addressing the ongoing inequalities that Black Canadians of African descent face. So since the recognition, UNDPAD Push Coalition in 2019 worked with Black organizations across the country. Floyd D. and Charles Friedl's Meeting of the Minds, Vanessa Fells out of Nova Scotia, UNDPAD Coalition, the 613-819 Black Hub, One Full Circle in Montreal, a number of organizations to push. Yes, Cesar, nice to see you, ma'am. A number of organizations put in place, to help us drive these initiatives. And we came together in 2019 to sort of push this stuff into government. And the things that we were pushing were intended to have measurable, meaningful impact for Black people in this country under the umbrella or under what I call a policy driver of the UN Decade for People of African Descent. So there were a number of initiatives that I think that came out into the public service. And I'll just name a couple of them that were spearheaded partly because of our push at the time. We have to recognize that the Canadian government and other Western nations did not vote in favor of the UN Decade People of African Descent. I think there are some issues with the decade and what it represents in terms of apologies and reparations and that sort of thing. So what we were able to do was kind of remarkable, given the fact that there wasn't really the same kind of support that you would see for Indigenous issues, for LGBTQ2 plus issues, or white LGBTQ2 plus issues, and for some of the other groups. So what we pushed into the government at the time and what got some traction and came back out into communities were things like capacity and capital assist for Black nonprofit organizations and Black charities through the Employment Social Development Canada, the Black procurement work to try to ensure that there were opportunities for Black contractors so that we could establish some degree of Black wealth that is generational, in the same way that other communities who have gotten here earlier and had opportunities to do the same have done. And so they usually get the lion's share of the big contracts. We push for that to open up for our communities as well. A Canadian Black Justice Strategy that came out last fall has been really slow to get moving, but this is out of the Department of Justice Canada, intended to address the overrepresentation of Black people in the justice system, as well as other issues in terms of our too much contact with that system, so-called justice system, I would say Canadian legal system. and the addressing the Black mental health challenges that our people face after, experiencing the trauma of generations of exposure to sort of societal and institutional anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate. The Public Health Agency of Canada is focused on that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that in advance of some meetings that will be taking place in Geneva, Switzerland, that some of us will be going to. But I thought I'd stop there because I did want to have a bit of a conversation in this space about how things are going with respect to the decade. And, notwithstanding that people don't know about it, but, I think we have still, even though the decade is almost over, 2015 to 2024, we still have opportunities, I think, to push to gain some reasonable, measurable, attainable results for our people under the umbrella of the decade.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Thank you for that little backgrounder. Welcome, Cesar. How are you?
I'm very good, brother. Hi, Brother Richard.
Good.
Brother Vibe.
Good.
Sister L. Sorry for being late.
Absolutely. So I will tell everyone, Richard wanted these two wonderful people as part of this conversation. And if you've watched Black Canada Talking before, you know why. If you haven't, you're going to find out why. So as we get into this conversation, as Richard had asked, let's have our first conversation piece. So the question to ask and ponder is, how are we doing now that we're coming to the end of the decade? 2024 is just around the corner. So Cesar, do you want to jump in first, or will you want Sister L to go first?
If L doesn't mind.
Okay, go for it, L.
Telling Cesar, but you want me to go?
Cesar would love you to go first.
Okay. All right. So how are we doing? Well, I mean, first of all, nobody's doing that well right now. And of course, we know that as we're in economic crisis, Black people will always be among the hardest hit by these crises. Obviously, with inflation, and we're seeing, cost of food go up. Obviously, Black people already have mass amounts of food insecurity, whether you're in rural communities like in Nova Scotia, or obviously in food deserts or other places. So we've already struggled with food insecurity in our communities, and now we're seeing food go up, basic products go up, things like gas, prices up across the board. And that's always going to impact us because we're already economically vulnerable for various reasons. Right now, of course, we're seeing a huge attack on workers in Ontario with the threats against the teacher strikes. New Brunswick has been threatening health workers striking. And again, that largely impacts Black people. One, because we're heavily in the sectors that are deemed essential work, like nursing, education, healthcare sector. Those are all heavily Black women in particular that are in those sectors. So it's always going to impact us. But also, of course, again, because we are vulnerable workers, we are highly involved in public services, civil service jobs. Black people are very dependent on government jobs in general. When we work professionally, we disproportionately work in government, like whether that's government granted agencies or for government services as well. So in particular, we're going to be affected when we have back to work legislation or when governments are able to block those things. So just in some of the general political landscape, the impacts of the pandemic and healthcare, again, the social causes of health have meant that Black people already have disproportionately bad health outcomes, not because of our own behaviors, but again, from everything from environmental stress, environmental racism and damage, obviously the poor conditions that we live in, poor access to nutrition and so forth. So we're already in a bad condition exacerbated by the general conditions as they worsen. Of course, then if we look specifically, so obviously within the justice system, where despite particularly the mobilizations of 2020, we didn't really get a rebound into the justice system. The recent OCI, Office of the Correctional Investigator report, recently, nearly a decade on, that report, first in 2013, the case study in diversity in corrections was released, which was the first time the OCI had looked at the conditions of African Canadian prisoners, and they updated it this year. It just came out last month, and nothing has changed. In fact, many things are worse. So over a decade of identifying these problems, we've only seen those conditions deteriorate, despite moves within the justice system to do things like so-called abolish solitary, so-called abolish some minimum sentences. The small moves towards justice reform haven't really trickled down into the Black community for a couple of reasons. One being that things like minimum sentences were specifically targeted more on like the crimes of white people, like, drug crimes and stuff, while actually enhancing sentencing on things that are coded as Black, like gangs, drugs, guns, which are coded as Black. So at the same time as we're getting these gestures towards justice reform, essentially the gestures, if your white kid is caught with marijuana, like, don't worry, like if they have cannabis, they won't be impacted. But if a Black kid happens to be like in a place where a gun is, we're going to crack down on them heavy. And some of these laws have already been declared, unconstitutional in various ways, but they continue to enhance them. Like the gun laws were already addressed by the African Canadian Legal Clinic years ago, but yet we still have people talking about specifically enhancing gun sentencing, which we know is directed at us. So we're still, I think, extremely in worse condition in the justice system than we were, despite some rhetoric on reform. And, there have been, I don't want to say there's been nothing done, like the community has. So we've got enhanced sentencing reports, IRCA's impacts of race and culture assessments, but currently only used at sentencing, although there's pushing for those to be used at every stage, like in parole, when you're disciplined within a prison, like it should always be active, but we haven't got that yet. We certainly haven't got the assessment during immigration and the crimmigration system. Still don't have numbers on that. The government refuses to track accurately the number of Black people held in immigration detention or the impact of deportation or those kind of policies. But we know through word of mouth that, it's Haitians, Nigerians, Jamaicans, Somalis that are overwhelmingly caught up in these systems again. But those conditions are, ever terrible. I'll put in a plug for the campaign, Welcome to Canada campaign, which is fighting to have provinces break their contracts with CBSA, Canadian Border Services agencies, to stop them from allowing provincial jails to hold people in immigration detention. BC and Nova Scotia have both agreed to remove provincial immigration detention, and we are pushing for that to be done federally. And it's important that we understand the intersection between the criminal justice system and the immigration system, that the immigration system is a criminalized one. CBSA is the only police force in Canada that has absolutely no oversight, including no complaints ombudsman, no oversight for how they function abroad, absolutely nothing, no oversight in detention. And of course, that largely impacts us. Child welfare, we've been seeing a lot with Indigenous kids in child welfare, obviously Cindy Blackstock's work and the work of others. We know that Black kids are also heavily within the system, and there hasn't been a lot of work, again, to really talk about what Black kids culturally experience in the child welfare system, or like policies to keep Black kids away from non-Black families, for example. Although, again, there's been work in communities to push for this. There hasn't been federal policy, including we fought for child refugees to not face deportation. They didn't have citizenship. We still haven't won that. And we were fighting for that in 2017. So I mean, education, our kids are struggling even more. COVID again, which the schools shut down, and Black kids were disproportionately impacted by the lack of access to education, which has gone on to impact our access to post-secondary, our success in entry into the job market. Young people in general are struggling entering the job market and higher education. Those numbers are down. Many young people in general feel a lack of optimism about the future and a great sense of despair. And that's, again, going to impact our youth, including the lack of access to mental health supports, the lack of access to job programs, the lack of culturally appropriate education. So I could talk for 5 hours just to say that, there's obviously, and this is not to denigrate the work that many, many people are doing on their own at a grassroots level in community to fight these conditions, but on a federal level or on a country level, on a systemic level, despite a lot of fine words about integration and diversity and EDI and representation and all of those things, when you actually look practically at what people are experiencing, not only are things not measurably better, in most cases, they are getting worse and deteriorating, I would say.
Okay, Cesar, what do you want to add after that, my brother?
No, that was very well put. Sister L, really, going down through institutions and really addressing it. And I will actually continue on what she said regarding exactly, there is great work that's being done regarding EDI, work, if nothing, conversations, more awareness, more consciousness. But even with that, we don't need to be gloomy or paint, to use that racist language, a dark picture of the fate of Black Canada. But we just need to look at a certain angle that's very concrete. When we talk about the conditions of people, aka a specific demographic such as Afro-Canadians / Blacks in Canada, let us look at our representation. So work with me here. Right now, we have the party in power, the Liberal Party, that does not have an elected Black person in in a ministry of authority. There is no single Black minister. Those powerful ministries such as finances, foreign affairs. Salutations to Minister Ahmed, of course, but anyone who follows politics knows exactly what I mean in terms of representation and ministry. At the same time, when you look at the party of the opposition, the Conservative Party, they deny systemic racism. When we look at the Green Party, they had the first Black leader, Anami Paul, and we know the debacle from that because she was Black, and even in terms of her being Jewish, lack of support from her own so-called Jewish community. When we look in terms of even the provinces, you look at, for example, the newly elected prime minister. Well, I shouldn't say elected. Technically, she hasn't been elected. My God, I'm forgetting her name just at the moment, of Alberta, the late Smith, or Danielle Smith, I believe that's her name. So Danielle Smith talking about the so-called freedom convoy being the greatest injustice committed upon people, as if this colonial country of Canada does not have a history of harm towards Indigenous and Black peoples. Even when you look in terms of Quebec, the former leader of the Liberal Party basically resigned, and she was a Black woman. I don't know why I'm forgetting her name just at the moment. She resigned. So if we just stay looking at the situation in terms of representation and political power, as it has a strong impact for everything that happens within the country, the picture is not the best. And when we can say that there is some type of representation, the truth is that it doesn't really come with concrete power for concrete change. Even when we talk in terms of federal workers, we have the lawsuit from Black federal employees. Just as lately, you look at on the culture scene, the National Film Board, our sister Rachelle DeCoste having made me aware of a potential lawsuit, or even a lawsuit coming there in terms of lack of representation and lack of diversity. So is it better how things are doing as we speak of the Declaration of People of African Descent? Sure, Canada signed it. There's been great symbolism. I mean, we all remember in 2020, Prime Minister Trudeau taking the knee, but concretely, what has really changed for our Black people as 2022, we're coming out of a pandemic? Sister El was saying it. There is such a representation of Black workers in essential services such as healthcare and the service-oriented domain, but are the living conditions, the quality of life, is it really improving in relation to the efforts, to the contribution that they bring into the Canadian society? I would have to say no. Yes, some individuals do better. I do better. I like to believe we do better. But a community is not defined by the well-being of one individual, just as if you look at the United States, Obama and Oprah don't represent the reality of African Americans, etc., etc. So the community as a whole, I'm even thinking of where you are, Dr. Vibe, in Toronto. If you really want to wonder about the fate of Black Canada as the decade of people of African descent is ending, the question that we would have to basically ask is, how are Black people, notably in that area called Jane and Finch, how are they doing? Are they doing better than 5-10 years ago? And
No,
if
they're being pushed out. They're being gentrified.
Gentrified. Oh, how interesting. It sounds very much like even here in Ottawa, in terms of Heronvale, Hawthorne, all these type of neighborhoods. So this is a behavior that we're seeing in terms of positive progressive rhetoric. Everybody's speaking the language, from unconscious bias to decolonization and etc. But the practices, the behaviors, but also the policies are not following truthfully, especially as there is a rebirth. I should say rebirth as if it was dead, but there is a renewed vigor of the white supremacist rhetoric, greatly influenced by the United States. But let us not be hypocrite. Canada was never this postcard country that it claims to be overseas. It just has taken a new wind and is more present than before.
Well, Richard, I think you got 2 stars with us today, big time. But I have a question for you, Richard. Who is responsible to monitoring either the progress or regress of the decade? Is there a bot? Is it the United Nations? Who's supposed to be monitoring the actions?
So that's a good question, because right now there isn't really anybody doing monitoring. There's voluntary, more or less voluntary reporting. Canada, I understand, is putting together a report on what they have done with respect to the decade, and I think it'll have a lot of nice stories to tell in terms of some of the activities that we've undertaken. And to be fair, to the extent that I can be fair, Minister Hussein, who's responsible for the decade, has done some things in terms of the Black Entrepreneurship Fund and at least trying to sort of frame some of that work with respects to the decade in a way that at least appears to be demonstrating progress. But the fact of the matter is that unless communities are very much engaged in the tracking, reporting, monitoring, and following and talking about how things are going with the decade, I don't think very much will come of it. We have to remember that our Western countries have not been all that warm to the decade, so reporting on it only brings more light to what you are not doing with respects to that work. So, but I have to say, it's been heartbreaking for me, being in the belly of the beast, to see the profound lack of progress on some of this stuff. Having people that are involved in the carceral system that I know and care for, knowing that there are countless others, knowing how profoundly unfair that system is to our people. It has been profoundly disappointing to see things like the justice strategy stagnate and not move, partly for political reasons. And it has been really unfortunate to see Black and racialized anti-racism groups have their funding blocked coming out of departments like Canadian Heritage because of the bad behavior of a consultant. So you basically stop the progress of this work across organizations that had nothing to do with the bad behavior of a consultant. Like, these kinds of things give me pause. But I'd really like to talk a little bit about why I do have a lot of hope in the work that will be undertaken through Geneva and through Black community organizations here in Canada. I think that we have an opportunity to amplify what is happening in Canada and being part of an international conversation, international planning, international work to address this, not just in our country, but across the globe. We have a really interesting, really exciting opportunity, I think, to sort of turn some of this stuff around.
So, Richard, before you move on, there's some questions and comments, and I guess it can be open to yourself, and if anyone else wants to answer. Have from LinkedIn. Good afternoon it's Marie. Good afternoon from Calgary. My name is Marie Cecile. I'm a planner, consultant, doctoral candidate. My doctoral research focuses on creating a framework to address anti-Black systemic racism in housing and homelessness. Thank you all for your work advocating for our communities and raising these important conversations. I would appreciate an opportunity to connect with all of you at some point. Well, I think we're all on LinkedIn. If not, we'll give our contact information. I know Els reluctantly just opened up a Twitter account.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, too, that there's some really interesting work on land trusts taking place in Nova Scotia. So Dr. Lynn Jones in Truro North Preston, Hammonds Plains. These are all historic Black communities that are setting up land trusts. So you might be really interested in that for your doctoral research as well, looking at other forms of how Black people are sustaining housing. So just to add that.
Okay. Miss Peters is in the house. Long time no see, Ketcha. Saying, great question. Where is the accountability? And I guess, Richard, you covered that with what you shared with us. Do you want to add anything more from what you've shared?
Yeah, we have to be the ones to drive accountability. Accountability doesn't come from governments; it comes from communities, right? They come from people who are asking the right questions and demanding that our institutions do what they say that they're supposed to be doing. If our institutions say that they're about justice, then they should not be unjust. If our institutions are about, making sure we have decent education, then we can't be expunging our children and our young people, denying people opportunities to education. So we have an opportunity, if not through asking questions, then people have opportunities at the ballot box. And quite frankly, this is a non-partisan issue as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe that any one party is any real better than another. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about being anti-Black or about being pro-Black. But all political parties, be they at the municipal, provincial, or federal level, respond to communities. And the Black community since 2019, our numbers continue to double every couple of years. We are a factor in centers like Toronto, Montreal, out east. We're a factor now in deciding governments in Quebec, even of all places, that create laws to exclude us from the social framework of things. So accountability, I think that part of this work that I'm stepping back into the ring, at least for a minute, with the Push Coalition to sort of help us coalesce some of our efforts and energies around making sure that people are being held accountable, the people who have those resources and the policy levers, the legislative frameworks that keep their foots on our necks or liberate us, get us to a place where we can breathe, and that we can and our children can have a place in this country, just like everybody else. We don't have that. I have great concern about the future of my children in this country. It is a shame that I have to look outside of this country for a place for my family, because even after my entire lifetime being spent here, I don't feel really, as things go, that we can put all our eggs in this one basket. So that has a lot to do with us and my decision to be here and to continue to do this work in institutions and out in the communities, because I do strongly believe that we are the ones who have to be the ones holding our leaders accountable, regardless of the fact of whether or not we voted for them or not.
Okay. Good stuff. So I think you also covered this, and anyone who wants to add, things appear to be good, but are they? And this is Robin from Ottawa. Are there or will there be evaluation reports on things like the Black Entrepreneurship Fund and Robin adds Black Entrepreneurship Loan Fund? So do you want to address that, Richard? And we'll turn on to you. Oh, and also, Cesar, if you have anything you want to add before Richard moves on to the next part of the conversation, please feel free.
I was kind of keeping it for the end.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah,
no problem.
I have to add.
Okay, go ahead, please.
This is less institutionally directed. This is more internally directed. But I think at some point we're going to have to, as a community, have a serious conversation about the role of misogynoir and patriarchy in actually impeding our progress. Because one thing I experience constantly is that Black women are on the front lines doing creative work, doing the advanced work, and then we get pushed out because we're threatening or scary, and then men come in on top of us who haven't been doing our work, don't understand the work, haven't done what we're doing, and they're the ones that go and sit at the tables. And this is one reason why we end up with weak recommendations. I'm sorry to say, guys, I work with a lot of great men. I'm not saying all men. I obviously, work closely with a lot of men, but one of the things, and also not even internally, because what happens is, of course, white power only wants to deal with respectable, titled men and finds women to be a problem, and then those men look, and I know you can all do some thinking in your minds and think about, which woman was on the ground in your community doing the housing or doing the health work or doing the justice work, and who ended up with the money, who ended up being consulted for the report, who got the contract. It's not the woman, it's the men who sat back on their hands and didn't say anything risky or do anything risky and then step forward, and the governments co-sign that. And that actually harms the way that we organize in community. It makes it really hard for women to continue to do our work when we're not resourced, when we're the ones doing the on the ground work. It breaks relations in our community. It's a deliberate choice by those in power to empower certain voices and disempower the women in our own communities who are then stigmatized and shamed within our own communities about our own work. And I think we need to really look strongly at that. So if you're a Black man and you find yourself getting a call from the government on work that you damn well know that some woman did, you should think a few times before you accept that and then hold yourself up and pose for the pictures. Because there are women that are working super hard and that have actually done all of this work, and you're building on our backs. And I'm really tired of seeing it happening. And then because of women's trauma, including like sexual trauma, women like have a very hard time confronting the patriarchy because we have so much internalized damage that's being done to us. So you have communities where women are then, of course, not even able to assert or work together because we're still working through and processing the things that happened to us generationally. So I just think that we can't ignore the gender lens. We like to pretend that sexism and misogyny only exist in the white community, or they don't exist in our community. And I can tell you firsthand, not to like plug my book, but like my book, which is a 10-year chronicle of like frontline work. But I'm still getting pushed out. So the only person that's done this work in some cases in my province is me in the Black community. Yet the only person that you won't see at the table or included is also me. So like, why is that? And it's true of a pattern of so many women as well. So I just wanted to raise that as well, that this is something we're going to have to take a really hard look at. When we push women out, it harms our entire community. Enough said. Okay.
Enough said. I was gonna say it could have been saved to the end, but I think it was we this is where we roll. We do conversations here. So I'm gonna ask then Richard, next conversation piece. You're going to the UN in Geneva, Switzerland next weekend. What's that about, and what do you want to accomplish?
Yeah, but before I go there, I just want to say, Sister L, I have to say that, and I'll let the whole world know that your name was put forward to be part of this a steering committee for the Black Justice Strategy, and for some reason, it didn't make the final cut. So I'm just saying, I agree with what you're saying in terms of people doing the work and not getting both the recognition and the opportunity to continue in a way that is meaningful. So the what's happening in Geneva. A couple of UN fellows asked me and a number of other folks from the PUSH Coalition, in particular Andrea Pierce, who's been doing, has not stopped doing this work. I stopped doing this work to come back in the government. She did not. Asked us to attend what's called the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And this permanent forum was established after the seminal work of folks, Black communities in South America, primarily in South America and in the Caribbean. Again, with the resistance from Western nations, including Canada, who didn't want this thing to happen. But it was adopted. It's actually being funded by Russia to the extent that it is being funded. So people should take notice of that. In terms of who's invested in Black communities internationally. My participation is being sponsored by UNESCO Canada, because I'm going over as civil society, I'm going over as a citizen, and as part of UN PUSH Coalition. So the purpose of those meetings really is to engage with Black activists, community folks from across the globe, who want to support the advancement of Black people under the banner of the UN Decade in a much more measurable way. This permanent forum, as far as I'm concerned, is always going to be there now, and is going to advise the UN Human Rights Council. And so why this is important, because of course the Canadian government and other member states are going to send their representatives to participate in those exercises. But I think that we'll have an opportunity, and what we are doing, I'll state sort of quite openly, is that we're already having conversations with communities from across the globe, Black communities. Wonderful, it's an amazing opportunity actually on things like that are led by Andrea Pierce actually on metrics and measurement and outcomes. Like we are establishing what success will look like for Black communities globally, and working with the people from Brazil and getting translation Portuguese, the Spanish Blacks from South America, the French from Haiti, and the French diaspora, of course, and English, and working towards building something meaningful, and taking the opportunity to also take our leaders to task on what they're not doing, and encourage the establishment of a framework that will help us, I believe, back here in Canada, because eyes out there are very much focused on what we do here in Canada, because Canada is seen, ironically, as a leader globally, because we're one of the only member states that adopted the decade and adopted it in 2018. So I think that this is, again, what we're trying to hope to accomplish is really from these conversations, and I'll stop after I state this, is that we want to set the framework, the groundwork for an international declaration on the rights of people of African descent, similar to the international declaration that has been established for the rights of Indigenous persons. Black people are a distinct group on this planet. We have no other group has experienced an African Holocaust to the extent that we have. Over 150 million people died over the Middle Passage and as part of the transatlantic slave trade. We have lost our names, we have lost our languages, we've lost our cultures, and we are still made to pay for our freedom in so many different ways. I think the thing that's, again, encouraging about what Elle was raising and Cesar, about all the things that are going south for us as Black people in this country, is that they're happening elsewhere. They're happening across the globe. So there's an incredible synergy that is taking place with communities that we've been talking to. We've been having meetings almost daily, even with the time zones being crazy. We've been having meetings almost daily on metrics, on measurement. And the last thing I will say, I keep saying the last thing I will say, but we're aligning to something called the Sustainable Development Goals that internationally has been recognized by Canada as well as things that we should be working towards to ensure that we have healthy societies. Things like addressing poverty, gender equality, unequal access to employment, education, all of those things. We're aligning the decade to Sustainable Development Goals because Canada's already adopted those goals. So in many ways, we're being very strategic through our international discussions. If we get some time before the end of the call, I'd like to talk a little bit again how everyday Black Canadians and allies and co-conspirators within this country can help us achieve the objectives that we hope to achieve out in Geneva.
Well, you're a media person's dream because you gave a lovely segue into what we were going to chat about next. So, where do we go from here? What needs to be done to improve the lives of Black people in Canada? So I want to bring in, Cesar has not spoken for a bit, and he said he had stuff to save till the end. So we're coming to the top of the hour. So Cesar, do you want to share now? Do you want to wait for Sister Elle?
I can go ahead. You see, when Brother Richard is talking about the far higher number than 15 million that often you find in books about how many Africans were taken out of Africa during the slave trade, you often hear 10, 15 millions, and it's much, much higher. And here we're talking also about the Arab Muslim slave trade. So we're talking about 100 to 150 million in what is called the Maafa, Swahili word for Holocaust, basically genocide of Africans. However, although Brother Richard is absolutely correct in terms of our particular victimization, as Black people, which is true on the four corners of the world, and no need to be anti-Russian to say there is strong anti-Black racism also in Russia. I mean, that we have Black people there who will clearly attest to this. We need to recognize that in this geopolitical world that we live in, we don't really have any friends. And even the governments of so called Black countries don't tend to be exactly pro Black. I'm not saying all of them, obviously, but as much as we can celebrate, Ghana Year of Return, that notably speaks to, you know, uh, descendants of slavery here, or we can celebrate Barbados ending its relationship with the British Crown. We have to recognize that anti-Black racism, due to slavery and slash colonial uh, practices, still impacts the mindset of so many of our Black people in our countries in the Caribbean and Africa, but right here as well in our communities. And it greatly contributes to the fact of us not coming together as a community. We like to celebrate the Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, just like get excited for a new Black Panther movie, but are we truly coming together concretely as a community? You see, the Black community, as Brother Richard was saying, increases in number at every census. And at the same time, we are a young, vibrant community. That's great. But it's not so much about the increasing in number, it's the strength in the community, as we can see of other communities, notably the Chinese and Jewish community, which then leads to weighing strongly on um, city, provincial, and national politics. You look at an example about the Sikh community, SIKH, which is absolutely marginal in India, where they come from. And yet here in Canada, my God, the Sikh community has such a strength. You just look at the truckers industry. The Sikh community is very strong there. So what I was going to say in terms of what needs to be done, we can depend and pray and hope a lot from the funding. We can want great initiatives from the United Nations. And when I say great initiatives, uh, this week ended the COP27 regarding climate change, which was held in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, so Eastern Africa. But the truth of the matter is simply this: ultimately, it comes down to us. Like Sister El was talking about, calling out misogynoir must come from within the Black community, from not just our sisters, but also brothers, standing up in solidarity to call out others, Black men, but also women who contribute to misogynoir and to other slavery, colonial, white supremacist mindsets that destroy our community from within. I'm not giving the allegory of crabs in a barrel bringing themselves down, because, first and foremost, crabs shouldn't be in a barrel. They should be in the sea and freely going onto the sand to create and build their lives, right? This is why in some places, such as Australia, which has strong anti Black racist policies, crabs are protected. You cannot kill those big crabs and just eat them. They're protected. We're not to be protected like we're a bunch of children. We have to be adult, consciously grown adult, go beyond the Black Panther and whatever. We can enjoy that entertainment, but the reality is we have to come together in terms of our community and do those efforts. This is the same thing all those other communities that have succeeded and thrived. And again, I give the example: the Jewish, the Chinese, the Sikh. That's what they did. It will not be any different for us. And this goes beyond giving some African or Black sounding name, or just wearing the latest African fashion or whatever. It will come with doing the work, standing up together, stop wasting our money into entertainment, religion, and all these things, but coming together and supporting our people who are truly standing up for the cause of our people. That's the only way. I mean, I don't see it sounds repetitive, as I always repeat this same message, but those successful communities did not do it any differently, even though some of them, yes, got helped by the system more than others. But ultimately, it's because they grew a community consciousness and mindset. Community consciousness that makes it that I don't need to be in Halifax to come and support to Sister L. I don't need to live in Toronto to think about our Black people in Toronto, same as our Black people on the four corners of Canada and the four corners of the world. I mean, that's my Pan-Africanism. You know, it's not just a facade, it's concrete.
Well, says, yeah, no, Del, but I'm going to have you, but I just want to catch up. Ketcher says, good point, L. Jones. We should call out these individuals publicly? And then Robin
if you want to take the biggest beating of your life, go. You can.
and Robin from Ottawa says the Black Man L sites are just some of those who gets the funding do little or nothing to effectively make systemic change and aggressively resist questions of accountability. Thoughts, L? Plus on top of what you're going to say.
Well, what I was going to say first is I think one of the big kind of scams run on the Black community is the belief that the fact that we have people of many different backgrounds is a weakness when it's in fact a strength. So, what's historically been one of our barriers is that, Somali community doesn't talk to Trini community, doesn't talk to Jamaican community, doesn't talk to African Nova Scotian, doesn't talk to Cameroon, doesn't talk to French. So we've sort of been led into this idea that our multiple different backgrounds are something that we can't unify on. And just to pick on what Cesar is saying, we actually have a huge strength there because we have so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds, ideologies to draw upon and to learn from, so that, when we actually start talking to each other, we're like, okay, if you're using a Yoruba thing, you can do it this way. And, I learned this from the way that Somali people organize and from the way the mothers understand something. And now I'm over here in African Nova Scotians have really strong connection to land, and we can learn from that. So I think one of the games that white supremacy has really run on us is this divide and rule between our different backgrounds, when in fact, we're in a better position than a lot of other groups because we don't have just one overarching religion, one overarching language, one overarching culture. We have this just so many different diverse backgrounds, which if we actually got and listened to each other and were working together, we would have this huge strength in just expanding how we think, because there's so many important traditions that we learn from when we stuff that's already been done, but we don't have to think about how do you have a different concept of justice because somebody's been in Rwanda their whole life and they already have experienced how people in Rwanda have done transformative justice to recover from the war. And this person over here has been fighting for land in South Africa. So we can take that into our communities and how do we defend our land against gentrification? So I think it's really important that we are able to, as Cesar said, work together in very real ways and really share knowledge outside of our communities, because understanding that from the beginning of enslavement, we weren't enslaved because we didn't know something. We were enslaved, in many cases, they went out deliberately to find people who had agricultural expertise. They were like, oh, we can't grow rice in the Carolinas. Who knows how to do this? Let's find these people in an area in Africa that grow rice and bring them in. And then we've been sold that we were beasts and ignorant, but we always had expertise. So just to say that, we have to believe in the expertise within our own communities to solve these problems. And we don't need to turn to the, European models or the white government or white education to learn this stuff. It exists in our ancestral knowledges and traditions. And, we need to learn to draw on that more. That was just, I was going to add that. How do we hold, I don't know, man, how do we hold people accountable in our communities? I mean, it's messy business, man. You'll take, as I said, you'll take the biggest beatings of your life. And then, if you survive it, then you realize you don't really care. And then you just keep going. And, I think you become stronger and more outspoken as a result, but it's difficult. And in general, how do we hold government accountable? How do we hold our money accountable? That's overarching through this conversation. What mechanisms do we have as Black people to ever get justice in a world that is determined that of everybody, we deserve no justice at all? So we are the only people expected to accept apologies and, little processes and, in lieu of actual reparation, right? So, just for example, Jewish people will talk about, the artwork stolen during the Holocaust, and they should. I'm not against them talking about that. But isn't it interesting that, there's actually people will be like, yeah, you should give people their property back, except we can't get our land back in South Africa. Only Black people are constantly told that it's somehow violent or threatening if we just ask for the bare minimum, the bare minimum of reparation. Jewish people got reparation after World War II, rightly so. They should have. But why is the idea that like Black people can never, ever, ever be given reparation? We just have to accept, you know, a nice little public apology that doesn't even come with like money or social change. So it's, if the very mechanism of accountability doesn't exist towards Black people, then what mechanism do we have to have accountability to them? You know what I mean? Like, when they're not asking to be accountable, they're not giving us money because they want it to be accountable. They're giving us money to shut us up. Like, that's why they give us money, to shut us down, so that they can give, like, you know, their pocket change and their rounding error to us, and then point and say how much they're doing for us. So the answer is we have to stay on people's necks as Black people, and that's hard to do, but we have to stay on the neck, like in a real way. We have to keep. We can't, you know, settle because one person got this, or like when we finally get a job or a house or whatever, then we're like, okay, I'm done. The race is run. We have to be very willing to fight these battles our whole lifetime with each other, for each other. But I don't blame us, is what I'm saying. That as much as I will complain about stuff that, you know, we do, we have to recognize it's taking place in a context of white supremacy, which denies us all of these ideas, and that is never accountable to us. So of course the money isn't accountable. Of course, government will never, ever, ever respond to us. So just, yeah, that's my rant of the day, I guess.
Okay, Cesar, before you come in, I know you want to add, and then I'll go to Richard. So Robin says here, folks aggressively resist questions of accountability, especially about their leaders. He also agrees with what you're sharing, El. And Ketcha says, they try to divide us, but always seems us as Black, or see us as Blacks. Okay, Cesar, then Richard. Oh boy.
I am not a fan of Kanye West nor Kyrie Irving, but to those people who react before understanding, it will sound like I am. The first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, said, I don't know if he said it in words or if it was written, but I read this. As painful as the Holocaust was, it was one of the best things that happened to Jewish people, because it reminded them that they are Jewish first. This is me bringing it up, in my way, but because they were also very divided. But non-Jewish people, aka white Christians, saw them first and foremost as Jews. It's the same with us. It is us Black people who fall into the traps of the slave masters and colonizers, Arab Muslims, and white Christians, in seeing ourselves first in terms of religion, Christianity or Islam, countries that are pretty much colonial creations, all of them, even the names of these countries, and even the languages that we speak, when at the end of the day, we are seen first and foremost, and as such treated first and foremost, as Black people on the four corners of the world. When COVID was there, the United State Department sent emails to Black African Americans in China, warning them that they might be victims of racism. These are Black Americans. These are not what you would expect Black Africans. They are not Black Caribbeans. They got an email from the State Department telling them to be careful, because ultimately they might get treated as Black people due to stereotypes and racism. It's the same thing that we have here. So we have to decolonize our minds. We cannot just be speaking about decolonization in Canada in regards to Indigenous people and talk about notably what from the religion to the institutions have done to them, when the same things have been done to us. The missionaries were not just in Canada, they were all over Africa. So at the same time, this is how we will come to be able to hold leaders accountable, because those specific leaders, first of all, we have to say their names. Why are we scared of saying their names? We have to say their names. They only get in bed with white institutions because they are seen as non-threatening. This is not a strategy. This is cowardice, as happened in all communities, by the way. I know of Palestinians who struggle with some of their own because they see them in bed with Israel. Just as when, most of the Jewish people were in Europe, they had conflicts with some of their leaders who basically were silent to anti-Semitism. This is a human thing, but we are black. We are still, as very rightfully Sister El was saying, others get reparations. Israel is still getting reparations. It's not that it ended X amount of years ago. They're still getting reparations, and Israel gets more assistance from the United States than all of Africa combined. This is not a poor country. Israel is like the ninth economy or 12th economy in the world. So us here in Canada, we have to change our mindset. Ultimately, it comes down to our mindset. We are a community that basically needs to speak up on this type of thing, which basically, and you see, this is what I mean. Like when we have some of our black people who refuse to do the introspection in our own community, but then wonder why other communities are advancing. My sister Corinne, it is necessary because I did Jewish studies. I did Jewish studies in university. That's why I can speak on this. Because I've been there with the Jewish community. Like, I'm not here just, that's what I said. Kanye and Kyrie Irving, I'm not one of them. But the nature of me having done Jewish studies in university makes it that I can speak about it. I can say why and how they succeeded. I presented on China and African relations. China-Africa. Why do they succeed? It's because, first and foremost, the mindset to see themselves first and foremost as a community. When I see Brother Richard and Brother Vibe, I'm not seeing Caribbeans. I'm not seeing Sister L as half black, half this, or maybe background from some. I see black people, black person first and foremost, from the lighter to the darkest, whatever you want to call it, because ultimately, none of them will see us as the individuals that we want so badly to be, or the religions or the country. No, they will see us first and foremost as black. Period. Even right now, we have the World Cup happening, the biggest sports event in Qatar. How are black people treated over there? It doesn't matter if they're Muslims. It doesn't even matter that they're football players. Football players, some of the richest black people in the world, famous black people in the world, get thrown banana peels on the court, on the football field. Allow me to stop it. It's not a rant. It's just a reminder, because you can have the best leaders. You can have a lot of funding money coming. You can have a lot of charisma and you can put a black woman at the top of the table, or a black LGBTQ at the table. Each and every one of us can shine as much as we want and be celebrated. And oh my God, that's amazing. But it means nothing if our community is still struggling. Our black children, youth, and families are still struggling and have to be fearful of institutions to which they pay taxes for. When we talk about police brutality and racism in institutions, black people pay taxes. And black people are not heard in the justice system. While you have other communities who also pay taxes, and yet they are heard in the same system. And it's not just because they have a lighter skin tone, but especially because they are organized as community, but also as political power in terms of representation. Perfect example, Ontario's Prime Minister, Doug Ford, will in a matter of 24 hours switch from "there's no systemic racism in Ontario" following the George Floyd video to 24 hours, "oh my God, systemic racism is unacceptable." Someone must have reminded Prime Minister Ford that he has a lot of ethnic minorities, notably Sikh and Chinese, and Somalis if you want, but especially Sikh and Chinese will vote for him.
All right. I know, Richard, you are a little bit bent for time, so I want you to close out the conversation. Robin has another conversation, but that would take a whole other.
Very quickly,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say that Stephanie Allen obviously faced an attack in Vancouver. So Stephanie Allen had tweeted about the inequalities in housing and how Black people remain property, and these capitalist relations continue to impact our access to things like housing. She was attacked on the floor of the legislative and has actually deleted her Twitter as a result. So people should send some support Stephanie Allen's way. Erica Eiffel is also currently being attacked. So just to say that we're seeing Ricardo Lamour, who's being still facing this lawsuit by SRC for him fighting the use of the N-word on radio. So just to say that as people, let's also like make sure we're sending support and organizing for people that are taking shots publicly. So Stephanie Allen with Hogan's Alley, people should send some support that way. Erica Eiffel, journalist in Ottawa, Ricardo Lamour, journalist and artist in Montreal. So just to raise that. And also we are sending them love and support as well. Stephanie has been, I think, on this program before herself. So, yeah.
Okay. So Richard, I'm going to have Robin, I know you have a question. As I said, I'm going to maybe Richard can incorporate this in the close here. Can you talk about the problems with governments at all levels, increasingly focusing on, quote, combating hate, unquote, at the expense of addressing systemic anti-Black racism?
Mm-hmm. Okay, just very quick, I'll touch on that. Canadians don't like to talk about anti-Black racism. Our institutions don't like to talk about anti-Black hate. Black people experience more hate crimes than any other group combined, including Jewish communities and others in this country, primarily in Ontario, where we catch the most. So that lack of desire in actually focusing on that means we focus on other things. We focus on putting in programs and initiatives to address hate for other groups, but not for Black. And I think that it is more than a problem. Because again, taxpayer money and our taxpayer money are going into institutions that are not serving us. So along with, I guess, as I close, I did want to leave folks with a couple of questions. And again, to sort of build on what Elle and Cesar have been saying domestically, what's happening, we're going to have a chance to talk about these things with other member state folks on an international stage. And I think that is a good thing so that we can compare notes and strategies with people who know they are Black. They are there because they know they are part of an international Pan-Africanist movement for action for Black people. I'm very hopeful, even though I don't have a lot of hope necessarily for the UN itself. Being together with people, having a reason to connect and organize ourselves outside of that space is probably the biggest reason for me wanting to go there. With respects to a couple of questions that I'd like to leave people with, and I'm hoping that to agitate people to action. Elle was saying, throw some love the way of our people, but in terms of the accountability arm that we as communities hold and wield, we should ask our institutions things like, who is representing Black communities when it comes to things like, the Black Justice Strategy? Who is representing the Black communities in this country with respects to the UNDPAD initiatives that are being driven by ESDC? What happened to the National Institute for People of Black African Descent? That's something that I was very proud of us working on and getting it in the government, and it's flatlined for over a year, no information. People should ask, like, where is that? Where's the data, the disaggregated data? People should always be asking for the data, and if you don't find it, create your own and talk about it. Elle provided me some wonderful contacts for folks that provided data on what's going on in the criminalizing carceral system for Black and other groups. Who's your MP? And ask your MP these questions. I guarantee you, if you do that, there will be movement. Because, like I said, we're always engaged in our country, either with whichever level of government that you're at, in these so-called democratic events, and our votes and our participation in these processes now matter. We have more influence than we ever have. People need to recognize our power. Support, although I'm not up for really big on apologies. Support the work coming out of the Nova Scotia UNDPAD group, Vanessa Fells, and their petition for that apology. Every couple of years, we push for an apology through a national petition, and I'm surprised at how little uptake that has taken. Apologies are precursors to reparations. That's why Black people are the only group in this country that have never received an apology for our enslavement and for helping to build this place and then be subjugated to anti-Black racism that has prevented us from benefiting from our labor. And the last thing that I will say is that as we build something in Geneva and in New York and wherever else we're going to be around metrics and around accountability, our intention is to come back to communities and share what we have learned, share the strategies that we're employing internationally, and hoping that we can get people. I'm going to go see Black Panther tonight. It's my daughter's birthday. That's what she said she wanted to go see. So we're going to go see Black Panther. But after the movie and we all feeling good, we still have to go back out into the rest of the world and deal with this nonsense of anti-Blackness. So the strategies in which we would like to employ need to be shared and discussed. And I'm hoping that through these conversations, I'd love to come back and talk about the outcomes of those discussions, because I think that they'll have wide-ranging implications for this country, if not for Black communities. So I thank you, Dr. Vibe, my sister Elle, my brother Cesar, for being part of this conversation. I really appreciate you giving voice and light to this work, because it's been a little bit in the dark and in the shadows of other things going on in this country. So thanks again. It's been great spending time with you guys today.
Happy birthday to little sis, please.
Yes, happy birthday. So again, and Richard, thank you. You're reading my alleged mind, because I was going to say, okay, when you come back, you got to come back here. And I also want to encourage that if any of the people that you meet, you feel should be on this platform, let's get them on here. Let's have a global conversation, because it's going on. This challenge is going on globally for too many years, and we have to chat. And I know Cesar will encourage us with our sisters and brothers and collectively get this to happen. Let's have the Pan-African conversation globally on platforms like these and others throughout our country. A few other quick things. Ketcha is saying the new law aims to, I guess this, she was talking about C5. The new law aims to address systemic racism, anti-discrimination in Canada criminal justice system, and ensure a fair, more effective justice system for everyone. We will address that when Richard comes back, because I know Elle has a lot to say about that in a big way. Someone communicated en français. So Cesar, I hope you can do some quick interpretation for me. This lady is saying this.
Yes, when I was making, she basically wrote, Corinne wrote, I don't think these analogies are necessary, with much respect. She was speaking when I was drawing comparison in terms of community coming together, standing together, comparison with the Jewish community. This is why I explained that Jewish studies is part of what I did study in university, and as such, very valid, very fair to make those comparisons, and we must not be shy of them, Jewish, Chinese, Sikh, etc., because ultimately this is how we succeed, coming together, not waiting for funding, waiting for hope, waiting for etc., coming together.
Wonderful. So before I let each one of you go, Richard, is there any access people can get in contact with you or the 613 maybe coalition, if you want to give out that information?
Yeah, I'm leaving the 613 hub to Robin, because I can't manage more than one organization at a time these days. But you can reach me at richard.sharpe.d@gmail.com. We're going to get the UN Push Coalition website up and running again with some supports from community, and we'll have a dedicated site and email access for folks, hoping to get a couple of organizations on board so that we can start engaging like we did in the past, pushing up into the system and back down into the community.
I like that, pushing up and down. I love it. Elle Jones, where can people reach you?
I'm on Twitter now. L Jones Poet on Twitter. Yes.
Well, thanks for allowing me to follow you. Okay, fantastic. And Cesar?
You can still find me. Yes, I do have Twitter, but honestly, I don't even remember the handle. No, find me on Facebook, Cesar Rimy, CESAR space RIMY.
Right.
Merci, Corinne. And I just like to say, Sister Corinne says thanks for the precisions that I added. Thank you, Sister Corinne. Merci, Corinne, pour ta contribution.
Yeah, and you guys go out and buy Elle's book.
Yes, and also Cesar has a chapter in a book too also.
Okay.
All right. So each one of you, thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will be doing. We'll catch everyone soon. Remember to give yourselves grace and don't just manage your time, manage your energy. And Richard, take care in Geneva, there and back, and while you're there, okay? All right. We're going to get everybody off now. Great conversation. And Richard is off now. All right. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to watch live or on the replay today. Epic conversation. We could have went longer, but Richard has places to go. So he's the person who pushed it up to 3 o'clock, but we are on most Sunday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern time, Black Canada Talking. You can also catch me during the week too, 9 a.m. on Monday morning, 9 a.m. Monday mornings and Friday mornings. Monday and Friday mornings, co-host and co-producing conversation called The Morning Vibe, myself and Ryan Knight, who is the executive director of the African Caribbean Business Network. And also then on Saturday nights, 9 p.m. on State of Things with Aisha, Jill, and Lala. So that is where you can also catch me. You can also reach out to me. Website is there, the drvibeshow.com. Email address, dr.vibe at the drvibeshow.com. YouTube and Facebook, The Dr. Vibe Show. Twitter at drvibeshow, and Instagram at The Dr. Vibe Show. Also, I'm going to encourage again, subscribe to The Dr. Vibe Show on YouTube and on Facebook, so you can get notified when these epic conversations happen, especially on YouTube. Not only subscribe, but hit the notification button too. Double for your trouble. And also, would you like to promote your business or service on the show? Contact me at my website address, dr.vibe at the drvibeshow.com. So we are finished. I think there's one or two last comments. Christopher says, definitely going to buy Elle's book this week. Yes, that's what we want. Make a decision and take action. Ketchup, great show. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We close out like this. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions that aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect. Remember to give yourselves grace and just don't manage your time, manage your energy. Looking forward to seeing you somewhere on the digital highway. Remember, subscribe. God bless. Peace, well, keep the faith, and walk good.